like to introduce to you our speaker, and his title is called Getting Along with Geeks. And I want to read his whole bio. I'll just take a second, because he says, got a geek in your life? Frustrated with their point of view? Do you feel you are Penny in another Big Bang Theory episode? I love Big Bang Theory. Then you will enjoy Joel Gilbert's personal stories about being a geek and dealing with geeks all his life. He is an engineer and has dealt with engineers and scientists most of his 50 years of practice. His wife Susan calls him Dr. Doom, and yes, she does poke him when Shelton does what Shelton does. I think you will all enjoy Joel's self-effacing stories about how engineers approach life, what they think is funny, and how you can endear yourself to them. And if you are a fan of the Big Bang Theory TV series, as I am, and of course as Joel is, you have already seen countless examples of why engineers can be frustrating and entertaining. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joel Gilbert.
Privilege to be with you. I'm not familiar with your organization, so I did go online to just see what you were all about. I didn't run into these four tests. I believe I'll pass them, except I'll tell you when I'm not, because a couple of the stories aren't literally true. But as we all know in life, sometimes what is literal truth isn't as good as what's, if you will, pictorial truth. Things you just think, that's true even if it didn't happen. Now, I am an engineer. I'm just curious, how many of you are engineers in the room? Okay, don't be embarrassed if you're an engineer. Okay, that's good. How many of you are technical people, though? I mean, you could be any form of technical, science. Okay, so a lot of you are technical. Well, then you probably will just go, yep, that's pretty much the way I approach life. If you are not technical and you have technical people in your life, they can be frustrating. They can be difficult, partly because we're wired up a little differently than most people. I thought it might be helpful if I give you a couple of illustrations of that. When I got my master's in chemical engineering from Rensselaer, which most of you don't know is a college, it's an upstate college, similar to Georgia Tech. As my master's thesis, I did something that kept women pretty far away from me. Analysis of the products formed in the partial oxidation of dried sewage sludge. It never made the bestseller list. And any of you who'd like to look at what a master's thesis almost 50 years ago might look like, it's actually very instructive. Now the reason I go back to this is back then I was a lot like I am now. I feared it wouldn't be able to fit on the spine of the book. And so I suggested to my thesis advisor, why don't we just shrink it down to a thesis on feces? And he wouldn't do it. But any of you would like to see what a master's thesis looks like, if you've never had a master's thesis actually to do, this was the days when you actually had to pay somebody $1 a page to type it. There were no autocorrects. You used whiteout, and in fact you had to erase. And I made a spelling error. Oh. Yeah. I thought I checked all my spelling. One of the characteristics of engineers is we have blind spots. We have areas in our life we're deficit. That doesn't mean that we make up for it in the areas we're technical, math and science and things like that. But we often have blind spots, areas which we just don't do well. And spelling was one of my challenges. I thought I checked every word that was correct, and as a matter of fact, when my advisor said, here, you've got a great thesis, I'm not going to ask you to do anything but just correct one word in it. Unfortunately, you spelled it over and over again the same wrong way. He said, at least you were consistent. I said, well, what word was that? He said, reveal. And I said to myself, R-E-V-E-I-L. He says, well, that's the way you spelled it. I said, oh, crap. I forgot. It's I before E except after C. And throughout this book here, I have made that one mistake. So that's one illustration. If you'd like to see it, I'll pass it around. It is instructive to take a look at what a master's thesis Now, back then as an engineer, we used this. Now, I don't know if I'm dating myself. How many of you recognize this and used it, okay? This is the slide rule. This is the days before calculators. I'm going to pass this one around because it is interesting. I used in college. Actually, I had a 21-inch slide rule. Whoa! Cool! And I had a hip holster for it. That was really cool. And you can tell I kept the girls away, too. One of the nice things about this, and by the way, one of the things that engineers and technical people often do is they're good at estimating. And the reason they're good at estimating is we didn't know where the decimal point was when we did any of the math with this stuff. And if you couldn't estimate what the answer was, at least pretty close, you couldn't know where the decimal point was. Now that's sounding really, really, really geeky, but I think it's helpful to understand, number one, why we relish this stuff. And therefore, we, frankly, don't get along with most people because we're just really not that social. As a matter of fact, one of the characteristics about engineers is that we intrinsically like each other, even if we're in different disciplines, even if we're in competing schools, because we respect each other for having gone through engineering as a discipline. But we tend not to be social. And so here's an advantage. Next time you have a party, invite an engineer. Number one, they'll come because they don't have anything going on in their life. Number two, you don't have to worry about them embarrassing you because they'll stay to themselves. They won't mix with anybody else in your party. And number three, they'll eat whatever you serve, so cleanup is a snap. Okay? Now, what's funny about engineers, though, is that if they've had a good time at your party, they'll face align your speakers and fix your garage door opener. So there's tremendous reason to bring engineers in your life. Now, as I was looking at your organization, I knew people who were Rotarians, but I didn't know what you were about. And I think it's really the idea of high ethical standards. Engineers will, of course, agree to that. As a matter of fact, one of the challenges with engineers is we're kind of prickly about engineering standards. We believe that they're inviolate, and if you do things wrong, things break and people get killed. And so we're basically kind of sticklers about that. And so one of the characteristics about us as engineers is we can almost always see why something will work. As a matter of fact, that's why she calls me Dr. Doom. No matter what we're doing, I can see things that'll go wrong. And what's kind of funny about this is we also then, in our language style, tend to be viewed as argumentative. Now, it's not because we're trying to argue. It's because we're trying to make sure you understand. So, for instance, as we're sitting there, my glass was half full. An optimist would say the glass is half full. The pessimist would say glass empty. What does the engineer say?
More
you
glass.
appear to have twice as much glass as you really need. We are just prone to be not, I'm not trying to say that we're right, but we're trying to be helpful with just filling in things that we're not sure everybody can see. So the Big Bang Theory is kind of fun. But what's on the Big Bang Theory doesn't reflect necessarily the full sense of humor we have. So as I was coming in here, I met somebody who's a mechanical engineer. Mechanical engineers, electrical, I'm chemical. Which you go, what? I'm really a thermodynamicist. For those of you who are engineers, I'm really an applied mathematician. I was an applied mathematician before we had calculators. So I'm a hardcore theoretical mathematician. Now, if you ever watch The Big Bang Theory, you notice how they joust. Well, here's the story of three engineers arguing who built the human body. And of course, the mechanical engineer starts and says, well, look at it. All those joints and tendons and muscles, clearly the work of a mechanical engineer. The electrical engineer steps in and goes, it wouldn't work at all. None of it would work a bit without the nervous system. And then the civil engineer comes in and says, well, you're both right, but who else would go and put a waste treatment system right through the middle of a recreational area? I rest my case. Okay. So we engineers are socially awkward, and we appreciate that in each other. We actually will relish that. The story is an engineer was in the in the park, sitting there reading a book innocently. A beautiful woman rolls up on a bicycle, puts the bike on the ground and says, "Take anything you want." And the engineer says, "So I took the bike." And the other engineers go, "Good choice, really, good choice." Okay, so how does this manifest itself? Well, engineers are braggers in some ways. We tend to get technically very deep. And here's an illustration of how we'll make that mistake in our relationships. A male engineer will brag about knowing 50 ways to make love to a woman. They don't know any women, but they have 50 ways to make love to a woman. But what happens then is these same men become contemplative about their inability with the opposite sex. And this story goes that this individual was on the beach. This was going to violate one of your laws. This one is not true. But it's got to be true. He's on the beach in Los Angeles. He's walking because he's just once again failed in a relationship. He stubs his toe, and sure enough, when he looks down, there's this thing. He picks it up and rubs it off. A genie comes out because it was a lamp. The genie says, "Master, you have any wish you'd like." And the engineer says, "Well, I don't like I don't like flying. I don't like boats because I get seasick. I'd like you to build me a bridge from Los Angeles to Hawaii." The genie goes, "Do you have any idea how many miles over open water and how deep the ocean is through all of that region?" The engineer says, "Look, you're right. I'll tell you what. Just help me understand the mind of women." Pause. Genie says, "Would you like 2 lanes or 4? Now, what happened is some of you are going to be very surprised, because how did I possibly marry a woman as charming as this with all of these difficulties? Well, there's a long story. I met her at an engineering meeting. Actually, I met her down in Biloxi, Mississippi, a technical meeting. I met her again in Washington and actually in Baltimore. And she is a physicist. So one of the characteristics that most of you don't appreciate who know Susan is she's a very technical person. She's the daughter of a PhD professor at the University of Kentucky, and her mother was a master's. So she is a physicist. So we are the Big Bang Theory. This really is Amy Farrah Fowler, for those of you who watch. But Amy could never look this good on a good day. But that this is Amy Farrah. So when we're together and we're just talking, be afraid. There are some of the conversations we've had, because she is actually, I know you don't see that about her because her natural personality overcomes that, but she's a very technical person. Okay, so let me just explain what happened when we decided to get married. One of the other characteristics you should understand about engineers is when we have to learn something we don't know. How do we do that? The most common method an engineer will use is a book. We will try to read a book about it. She asks me to join her on a ski trip out to Colorado so we can announce our engagement. I don't like heights, speed, slippery surfaces, never been on skis any time in my life. I don't even like ice skating, and I'm now going, "Oh, sure, dear." And so what I did, and she remembers this because this is really embarrassing, the first thing I did, of course, was to try and find a book. And I found one with pictures and something I could use as vector diagrams. And I figured out, okay, I think I can understand what's going on here. I picked one with lots of pictures and people falling down because I knew that was where I was going to be. I, of course, then not only read it, I highlighted it with a yellow highlighter, and then in the back of the book created a crib sheet so that I didn't have to go and remember everything. I could cram for the exam when I went. I'm now flying with Susan on a plane to go to Denver, and I'm cramming like my life depends on it. As far as I'm concerned, it does. And the person sitting next to me looks and he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I am now going to have to learn to do something. I know that I'm not going to do well. I'm scared to death. I don't like heights, speed, slippery surfaces." He says, "You're never going to learn to ski by reading?" I said, "You don't understand. I'm an engineer. I've learned everything in my life by reading. I'm learning this by reading." So, of course, needless to say, any of you who've skied, how many of you skied? Any of you still skied? How well do you think I did memorizing a book to go and try to ski? Not very well. You get out on the school. So the first thing I did was, of course, take a lesson. I picked the class with the most out-of-shape, impossibly unfit people and joined them. I figured I've got a chance. If they can get down the hill and not die, I'll get down the hill and not die. I'm just trying to show you how engineers approach life. It's not necessarily how you would approach life. Okay, so, and needless to say, after all of this, I did learn to ski. And for those of you who are curious, I became an intermediate skier that first week. I actually got to the point of that. But I didn't do it by reading a book. I didn't do it by reading a book. So one of the characteristics that happened out of all this is once we were married, we went on vacation. We went skiing fairly often after that. We went skiing fairly often. And as you learn to ski, they teach you some tricks. And I found that people who can help you overcome your fears because of simple things that they ask you to remember are really valued in my life. And what I will tell you is, if you've ever learned to ski, one of the characteristics that's frankly very, very difficult is to keep your weight forward. Very simply, on the skis, you tend to want to lean back because you're scared, at least like me. The idea of leaning forward isn't intuitive. And any of you who have skied know that if you lean forward, you get control. If you lean back, you lose control. Well, as you're first learning to ski, they tend to start you on short skis because, after all, there's a better chance of you having control. But what's the problem with short skis when you're an adult male? You don't look very cool. As a matter of fact, when I was in the line at one of the bunny slope hills, the kid behind me goes, "Wimp skis, wimp skis!" On top of his lawn. I was going to kill a little brat. So I get to the end, and of course, in this class, I'm not taking any chances. So you went up the lift with somebody else. I went right up to the instructor, a gentleman who was very good, and I said, "Can I go up the lift with you?" Because I'd read the book that these lifts were dangerous places. So I'm with him. I've got this wimp ski brat behind me bitching at me. I said, "What do we do?" He says, "It's real simple, Joel. Just put your butt down, look back, grab the rail, and just sit and just relax." Okay. So I'm with him. I get up there. We get to into the chair. I sit back. I lift, and then whop! The skis had fallen off because what happened was, on those bunny slopes, they get very wet and sticky, and he never told me to lift the skis. So here I am, the first time up the lift, no skis on. Very hard to look cool. Way cool. Way cool. So just in case you're getting used to it. Now, let me just tell you another story, because these are all true. This one is staggering. How many of you know what the Murphy's Law is? I mean, you must, okay, engineers are trained. Murphy may never have existed physically, but we all know him as engineers. Murphy's Law is basically stated as when something can go wrong, it will usually go wrong in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. Some of you may know that Murphy was actually a school teacher, and he had a group of students. He was trying to teach that Mother Nature is a bitch. And he basically said, "Look, I want you to all butter one side of a slice of bread, throw it up in the air, and when it lands, we're going to figure out how many of you found your bread buttered side down." And that's the other phrase that you'll hear about Murphy's Law, very often stated. It's the buttered side down law, that most of the bread will fall to the ground buttered side. Now the engineers in the room go, "Of course, the center of gravity of the bed would naturally make it so." Yeah. Anyway, so the 26 kids throw it up in the air. He says, "Okay, how many found your bread buttered side down?" And 25 of the 26 found their bread buttered side down. And he says, "See, 25 out of 26 times, bad things happen." And then the other kid said, "What do I do, teacher? Mine's stuck to the ceiling." Now, with that as a preamble, I'm going to tell you a story. It is true, and it is so hard to believe you're going to think I made it up, but it is not at all untrue. So I'm going to keep to this motto here. When Susan and I had been married, it was our first anniversary, we decided to take a vacation. We just picked a place in the Caribbean. We didn't understand until we got there that it was going timeshare. And so what they were doing was trying to promote you buying that place as a timeshare. Well, we both taught sales training, so we thought, well, let's just go listen to how they pitch this. And so it was towards the end of the week, we had free breakfast, and they started the pitch. And they said, you can own this place for the next 28 years. In Mexico, you don't ever own anything in perpetuity because it reverts back to the government after 30 years. You can own this place for the next 28 years. And it'll only cost you $4,500. So, of course, the engineer in me raised my hand and said, what's the maintenance fees? And she said, well, last year it was $150. This year we think it's $160. I'm doing the math. Well, we'd spend $1,000 to stay there for the week. I'll round that to $200, $800, $4,500. It's 4.5-year payback, 5-year payback. Yeah. Anyway, it's getting late, and she says, look, Joel, Susan, you're the last people I'm talking to. If you'll sign right now, I'll drop the price to $3,500. I said, okay, I only have one more question. How often do hurricanes hit a place like this? She said, we haven't had a hurricane in 35 years. So I hear that, Susan hears that, we go, all right, done, sign. We bought it. Next year, I don't know if any of you remember this, Hurricane Gilbert hits Cancun. I'm not making it up. Hurricane Gilbert, 200-mile-an-hour winds came on shore. You think our maintenance fee stayed at, $160, $100? Well, of course not. So there you go, one of the characteristics about this. Okay, so as I'm trying to give you all of this, I just got to tell you that we as engineers, when we're around each other, love the stories. And we actually appreciate people with great enthusiasm in their careers. When I was in, this was about the time I met Susan, I had 2 engineers working for me at James & Moore, a large consulting firm, and we were on a business trip. And we were at a conference in New Brunswick, Canada, and we were just privileged because the Department of Energy of Canada, Ministry of Mines, had their chairman at our meeting. And this was a guy who was like Mr. Energy in Canada. And so he had keynoted the day. We were at dinner with him with a whole bunch of other professionals. And one of the guests at the table said, Mr. Hook, Dr. Hook, can you tell me how you believe energy can be made relevant in today's society? And he, of course, was ready for this, given his position. He says, it has to start at home. I thought, oh boy, he's got a story here. He says, well, when I get home in the evening, I take my bath. Then, when I'm done, I do not empty the water. I let my wife take her bath. Then, it gets better. Then, when she's done, we wash the children. And then, we use that water as a pre-soak for the laundry for that day. One of my engineering associates is reached into his pocket, and I don't know what he's doing. I said, Dr. Hook, do you know how much you've saved with this energy efficiency program? He says, absolutely. As you expect, engineers keep track of everything. I have detailed records before and after this efficiency effort. I've saved $79.50 a year by water reuse programs in our home. Okay, at that point, my employee, the fellow who worked with me, George Redden, hands him a check for $79.50 and says, I want you to stop doing that. How are we doing on time?
Good. Yeah, we're good.
How much more? I know.
9 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so as you can tell with all these stories, there's just a lot going on in an engineer's mind. You, if you're not a technical person, think that we're all kind of, just obsessed about certain things. But I want you to understand that we actually like obsession. All right? We actually like the details. And so when you don't like the details, we'll find somebody else who does. And so the point is we'll hang with people even if we don't like them because they'll listen. Okay? I mean, it's just really, really simple. And so one of the characteristics is that we then try to find things we can talk about. Now at Rensselaer, when I was there, we set the all-collegiate record for most consecutive football games lost. Now I don't know if you can imagine this, because we were playing in the dirtiest league. We had really the worst football team. And back in those days, we had hockey players. We imported them from Canada, but we didn't have a football team. And so for all of my bachelor's, all 4 years, my first master's, which was 2 more years, and even my second master's, we hadn't won a game. We actually brought an all-girls school in who had just for the first time had a football team, and a male football team, and they beat us. And so we were the laughing stock. But so the fact is, you know, when we would go to football games, our cheers were really for our own entertainment. And several of our cheers would have pi 7 digits in them just to entertain each other. Now you look at that and you go, what is wrong with you? When you don't have a winning team, you don't have any school spirit. We ran the wrong way down the football field. We would score on the wrong goalpost. And so when you come through a school like that, needless to say, you get used to different things. Now, the other thing that was true about Rensselaer back when I went was there weren't very many women. Today's engineering schools have a lot of women. But back then, if you were a geek, you were probably male. There are a lot of female geeks today. But one of the characteristics is, just so you understand, I went to this school because my aunt was one of the first female graduates. I always admired her, and I wanted to go where she went. I had no idea about schools. Basically, I went to Rensselaer just because my aunt, Dorothy, who was a chemical engineer, went there, and I figured I'm going there. If it was good enough for her, it was good enough for me. But when we went to school, when I went to school, there weren't any women on campus. And so, of course, if you're going to try and find anybody to date, you have to find a neighboring college. And so we had Russell Sage. I don't know if any of you know any of these college names. I don't know if you have anything equivalent in the South, but Russell Sage was noted for creating wives for engineers. That's the only reason the girls went there, was to find a mate at Rensselaer. And so the point is, we did have at least a neighboring college where you could find them. And that may have been the reason why we're so socially awkward. And by the way, when you're around engineers, you will often find that they do cluster amongst themselves, and they don't know how to talk about things, so they'll admire each other's shoes. I don't know if you remember this back, because I don't see it anymore. We were notorious for wearing white socks. Okay? We were notorious if you broke the rim on your glass here, you'd use a Band-Aid to fix it. And we were notorious for pocket protectors. Now, I haven't seen one in a long time. But does any of you know what I'm referring to as a pocket protector? Okay. You would have this piece of plastic in your pocket brimming with pens and pencils. And of course, if you were really cool, multicolored pens and pencils. Now you know why women would run for their lives, right? Okay. So as I wrap up here, let me kind of give you a couple of other situations. You know, when you're awkward and you're socially inept, it is hard to meet a person of the opposite sex and for them to find you attractive. So when I was trying to court Susan, I saw her in Biloxi, wouldn't pay any attention to me. Tried to get her to pay attention to me by writing back then. Saw her again in Baltimore, and this time I'm not taking any chances. I'm going, all right, I'm pulling out all stops. And what I did was, one of my clients, who happens to be here from Georgia Power, was flying home with her. At the time I was living in Washington, living in the Baltimore area. I told him to put a good word in for me. And so I asked her whether we could get together. She was in a firm that was kind of off to the side, similar to my firm. And so she agreed to have me meet her. And I said, well, can we go out? And so she's realizing, oh boy, I've got to go out with this guy. So our first date was, get this, a Toastmaster Christmas party. And I went, I'm thinking, okay, that's fine. Our second date, what was the second date? It was your company Christmas party. Company Christmas party. And she pawns me off on the president's wife because she's filling time for this event. She didn't want to be with me because, after all, I was 10 years older than she. I was just really not what she was looking for. And so she's building time. So she pawns me off on the president's wife, because she figures, okay, they'll get along because he'll talk the Bible, she'll talk the Bible, that'll be the whole night. So the second night was the Toastmasters Christmas party. I asked her out again. She had no more excuses. 4 weeks later, we were engaged. So just for the interesting fact that we were engaged. Okay, my last story is just a cute little joke. It'll violate the rules here, so I'll tell you that it violates the rules. We engineers like linguistic things. We like puzzles. And I love this one. It's on my Facebook page. If you engineers just relish kind of interesting things like this, linguistic type of things. And this is an MIT linguistic professor who was lecturing. He says, in English, a double negative forms a positive. However, in some languages like Russian, a double negative remains negative. But there isn't a single language where a double positive results in a negative. An engineer in the back of the room says, yeah, right. I can tell you're technical, you get that. That is engineering humor. You've got to be smart to get it. You've got to be quick. Yeah, right. All right, thank you.
Joel, one thing. I have to add one little story on you.
Uh-oh.
Told enough about me. Okay, so we're on our honeymoon on the beach in Cayman Island. And I'm reading a People magazine or something really good. And I look over and I don't know how he got it there, but he had this enormous book. A giant book. And I picked up the book and what are you reading on our honeymoon? And it said boiler optimization. You're reading boiler optimization? And he goes, I am not reading it, I'm correcting it. Yeah.
Can I tell one more story?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, and that is actually true. Okay. We engineer, I know it's not necessarily a redeeming quality, but it is who we are and how we value each other. When you can play with words and play with numbers and play with things and mentally joust, we enjoy each other. We don't get physical. We don't worry about who you voted for president. We don't care. We care more about enjoying the intellectual jousting. And it's jousting with nobody gets hurt. And so whenever I run into things that are intellectually jousting, I just enjoy it. One came across my desk, I'll end with, and it's the story of Forrest Gump, who dies and goes to heaven. And St. Peter meets him at the gate and says, Forrest, we've followed you all your life, and you've been a wonderful person. But unfortunately, heaven's filling up, and we've got 3 questions you have to ask as a test before we let you in. Forrest Gump, of course, says, really? He says, yeah, I'm sorry, but we just have too many people up here. He says, so Forrest says, okay, what's the first question? And St. Peter says, I want you to give me the days of the week that begin with the letter T. Forrest goes, oh, today and tomorrow. St. Peter goes, all right, I'll give you a pass on that one because I wasn't explicit in my question. All right, here's another one. How many seconds are there in a year? And Forrest puts his head down and he goes, oh my word, oh my. Oh, 12. 12. Yeah, there's January 2nd, February 2nd. Okay, Forrest. I'll let you go on that one, but this last one is frankly a stumper, and it's what's keeping people out of heaven. He says, St. Peter says, what's God's first name? Oh, and Forrest says, well, that's the easy one. Andy. Andy? Yes. And he walked with me. Engineers, that one they'll write down and repeat every time they can. Their children will get punished with it, their wife will get punished with it if they're married, and everywhere they go. We enjoy mental jousting. So if I've helped you understand male engineers, then certainly I hope you understand me a little better. It's just find puzzles, and you can keep an engineer busy for hours with them if you just give them something to chew on. I thank you so much for having me here today. I hope I've helped you I hope I've offered you help if you do deal with technical people. I guess we do have some time for questions if I can.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any questions?
Who has the first question today? You said you're scared.
So, if any of you are interested, I've written about 15 books in my life. This is the last one I've written, probably the last one I will write. It's the Thermostat Stupid, and it is a play on words around the energy industry. For those of you, if you are in the energy industry, give me your card. I'll send you a digital free copy of it. It is an interesting paradigm. Those of you who know me personally, and I've done a couple of houses, I did Kathleen's house. It is an interesting time in the energy industry, but that's for another time. But any of you are interested, if you'd like, I'll send you a digital copy of the book. Any questions about technical people, situations? You're good?
Thank you very much.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, Carl.
All those things you said about nerds, or excuse me, geeks, you seem to overcome in your speaking ability. So, how did that happen?
Well, okay, so, thank you. I think I've overcome them. I really haven't.
You certainly not awkward.
Okay, so what happened was, and this is actually how I met Susan. In my career, so I started out at Knowles Atomic designing attack submarine power plants under Rickle. Hunt for Red October style nuclear sub work. I was in reactor safety, not a funny job. Actually, I spent my career making sure the Thresher, if any of you remember the sub that went down in the 60s, my job for 6 years was to make sure that never happened again. And I left that to go into healthcare management because in order to use my master's in management, I wanted to get away from engineers. I felt I'd never used my master's in management if I did. So I went into healthcare, and I rose to be deputy director of Hospital Association of New York State. It was at that point that the humor in business really started to overtake me. And I don't have time, but I'll give stories. It was amazing to me in a technical thing of medicine to see how funny it was when you started dealing with people. When I left that and I went into energy, when it's about the time I met Susan, we both became trainers. And one of the characteristics as a trainer is you learn to use humor to keep people's interest, because otherwise it's over. And so when you're trying to take a technical subject like engineering and heat transfer and thermodynamics, and you've got 8 hours of the day, and you're trying to keep them from nodding off and keep them interested, you start learning how to introduce appropriate humor. And I would say that was the single thing that forced me to get funny. Because otherwise it was over. I mean, this is really not going to go down well.
She wants a photo op with us.
Okay.
So I'm around here. Be very much.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Andy, can you get us your picture?
Wow. Wow.
But what we'll do is we're going to take a picture. What we're going to do is we're donating a hero box to an active duty officer.
Oh, good.
I'm sorry, active duty service person named Mika Branch. So we'll be shipping that picture.
Well, that's very honoring. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.